Good afternoon. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm the editorial board chair for the CDO magazine, and I'm excited for today's conversation, which will focus on the evolving role of the chief data officer and the importance of education in preparing the data executive of the future. Joining me for this discussion is Dr. David Steier, professor at Carnegie Mellon University and lead faculty of the new Chief Data Officer Certificate Program, and Dr. Inderpal Bhandari, the Global Chief Data Officer of IBM, the advisory board chairman for the program, and a strategic advisor for CMU's new program. Dr. Steier and Dr. Bhandari, you're both alums from Carnegie Mellon, receiving your PhDs, and both have gone on to have distinguished careers in the field of enterprise data management and data science. Would you please talk about your individual career journey over the years? Let's get started with you, Dr. Steier.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. It's interesting. Inderpal and I actually graduated from CMU at about the same time. I stuck around at CMU a little bit, was on the research faculty, working on software integration and various applications to engineering design. Then the field of consulting called me, and PricewaterhouseCoopers hired me for about a dozen years, Deloitte for about 8 years, and I've worked at a few startups as well, dealing a lot with unstructured data, which is relevant to today's conversation. My advice, by the way, to anybody listening to this is, since I left PwC and came back to PwC, I left CMU and came back to CMU, is don't burn any bridges, because you never know when you're going to need those connections again.
That's great advice. I can attest to that myself. Dr. Bhandari, how about you?
Well, yeah, we graduated about the same time. And I went on to IBM Research as a research staff member at that IBM Watson Research Center. So I was there for about 7 years. Mm-hmm. Then I started my own company in data mining and ran that for about 10 years. That then allowed me to get a good view of corporate America and the needs with regard to data. So I ended up creating this role of Chief Data Officer, the first in healthcare in 2006. Mm-hmm. There were only 4 of us globally at that time. Then the profession took off and took me with it. So I ended up creating that organizational capability, the Chief Data Office, in 4 organizations, IBM being the latest. And I second David's point that don't burn any bridges. I came back to IBM after almost 2 decades.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Dr. Bhandari, since the Chief Data Officer role appeared on the enterprise landscape about 2 decades ago, the roles continue to evolve. In your opinion, how has the role evolved over the years?
Here's how I like to explain it. The data role has been around for a while, but the actual CXO labels, whether it's a Chief Data Officer or Chief Analytics Officer, Chief Digital Officer, Chief Transformation Officer, those are somewhat more recent. Mm-hmm. And I think the transformation that happened is there was a recognition and an awareness that this data role is a lot more strategic than it was previously understood to be, right? Previously, it was about, okay, manage my data, do some governance. That was the data role. And a lot of people tell me that when I tell my story about the role, being there were only 4 of us in 2006, and they'll say, yeah, but we were doing data stuff before that. But what actually happened was there was an awareness by the CEO, the C-suite, that data is actually a strategic asset for the company. Mm-hmm. And it can completely change and transform the company. And I think that was the key evolution in the role, which then brought it from being a department in the IT area into the C-suite, essentially. So that was the key transition and the key evolution of the data role.
Yeah, that's really a good point. I've seen that happen and been a participant there. Dr. Steier, in recent years, data sources are becoming more diverse, both in terms of including structured and unstructured data, and bringing external data content to complement internal data and streaming data from, IoT devices, et cetera. So just a very diverse landscape. How do you see the CDO's duties evolving in response to this rapidly diversifying and intensifying in velocity and volume data landscape?
Yeah, it's a really good question because structured and unstructured data, the distinction and how to deal with it has really been characterizing a lot of my career. I like to tell people that I like to focus on data that everybody else has given up on, and unstructured data is kind of an example of that. The data is stored on some raw format, and the traditional relational operations like selects and joins, they don't work. It's not in a traditional relational database. So that means that CDOs, they need to get comfortable with a situation in which it's impossible to even apply and measure data quality as it's traditionally defined. So invalid values, outliers, all of that is well defined for structured data, but not for unstructured data because you don't know how you're going to use the data. And sometimes directionally correct answers are the best you can get. You can't insist on absolute accuracy. So the CDO has to get comfortable with that. With external data, of course, the organization doesn't own the data, so the traditional notion of data governance has to get more flexible. You can't enforce your own organization's internal standards on external data, since you don't own it, and you have to anticipate changing fields, changing data structures. And so responsibilities include things like monitoring those external data sources, their changes for both challenges and opportunities, and ultimately developing, well, maybe not the CDO personally, but leading teams that develop connectors with new kinds of underlying technology, more like entity recognition, summarization, indexing, and translation than traditional SQL. So that definitely puts the CDO in a new environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And within that, I'd like to stay with you for a minute. Within that context, I think there is this notion of accelerating the value recovery or the value delivery from this diverse data landscape, which is really sort of on the consumption side of the data management and analytics, equation. How do you see the CDO influencing the consumption side and the value extraction?
Well, the CDO really then has to become an advocate, perhaps an evangelist, if you like that word, for using data in new ways, in strategic ways, and making sure that once data has been acquired, that it actually gets used, or perhaps if it doesn't get used, to keep a tab on the investment that the organization is making in that data. It definitely involves paying attention to the monetary value, both on the revenue possibilities and the cost side. Some people believe that, memory is free, just store all the data. I don't believe that. By the time you get to regulatory retention requirements, auditing requirements, traceability, and all that, it's definitely not free. So that becomes part of the CDO's responsibility as well.
Before we go on, Dr. Bhandari, how would you comment on that question of value extraction in this new diverse landscape and the role of the CDO to see that fulfilled?
Yeah, I mean, just in keeping with my remarks earlier, right? So the CDO's role is to make data a strategic asset. So what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that is there's a business strategy. The reason the CDO is a C-suite role is the CEO, senior executives, they have some kind of business strategy. They're planning to make money in some way. They're planning to accrete in value in some way. You've got to figure out what they're planning to do to be accretive in value. And you've got to figure out how to use data to get to that. So that's the value piece of the puzzle. That's how you end up creating value, by tying into the business strategy. Then, I mean, in terms of these, you've got to watch what's happening on the technology side. And David was just giving you an exposition on all the different things that are now available, which weren't available, with regard to unstructured data, external data, as well as various, esoteric algorithms and technologies that are all available. The CDO's role is to bridge that first piece, the strategy piece, with these capabilities. So you extract value, and then it's also to execute on delivering that value by making sure that there is an adoption by the organization of what you're creating. And that's the organizational piece of the art, that you've got to kind of master and execute on.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, I believe in the introduction, this whole idea of organizational change management being really essential to really drive the value opportunity, across the finish line. And so I think that's really a key point to keep teasing out. And as we think about in this conversation, we're thinking about data leaders, CDOs of the future, what they've got to really be trained in and well versed in navigating that whole adoption piece. I think it becomes really, really critical. I'm just excited about the fact that I'm here talking to the CDO of IBM. IBM if almost single-handedly back in the teens of the 1900s defined data processing as an industry and applied technology to it, automated data processing. So data has been around since before technology, and maybe if there's, post-technology, data will still be around, and value is in that. As you think about, this whole field and the challenge, would you agree that data management strategy can only be relevant for an organization if it's aligned to business strategy? And how difficult is that to do? And as you think about that, where do you see a data strategy evolving in years to come? Again, data is this sort of only sort of durable content within the IT equation. So what does strategy mean in that context? And how is that going to evolve?
Yeah, I'll answer it in a couple of ways, right? So I'll kind of take you back to before the CXO roles were created around chief data officer and so forth, and how a good data executive operating at that time would essentially contribute, because they wouldn't be privy to the C-suite. They wouldn't really know what the business strategy was, but they'd have a rough sense that, the company must deal with clients. So we have client data. I've got to clean up the client data. I've got to make sure there are not many duplicates in the client data. I've got to make sure the addresses are accurate. And that's kind of how they'd go about it. In a common sense way, they would approach this equation so that there would be value in that data whenever it got used by the enterprise. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, not being fully aligned with the business strategy, there could be a lot of work done, and there'd be criticism about boiling the ocean, things like that, because
right.
There's so much data, you don't know where to start. Nowadays, the CDO is expected to be a change agent, expected to be an agent of transformation. So the very first thing you've got to really hone in on is, like I said earlier, how the company is planning to make money, or how the company is planning to be accretive in value. Are they going to introduce a new product? If it's a new product, which segment of customers are they going after, et cetera? And you kind of back in from there to the data that's required to fuel that. It could be something very ambiguous to begin with. I mean, I'll give you the example within IBM. When I joined, and this is my step one to figure out the data strategy, I tried to understand the business strategy. And it became clear that even though we made money from many different sources, like mainframe computers, like middleware software, et cetera, the senior leadership was all focused on it's going to be cloud and AI. That's how we're going to make money. And that's the strategy, right? That's the strategic direction. But then we asked the question, well, do our clients, the IBM enterprise clients, do they even understand how to make, how AI is going to be useful in the context of the enterprise? And the answer was no. So our data strategy became to create an AI enterprise within IBM and then use that as a showcase for clients and customers. So just giving you an example of, like, in a very ambiguous situation, you kind of start off at that level of vision statement, but it's tied in squarely into the strategy of how the company is planning to make money, and then you back in from that. So, once you're going to be an AI enterprise, unstructured data has to be brought into the mix. David was talking about that. It becomes very critical, relevant. You wouldn't otherwise do that. So that's the way to go about it. The data management piece really comes in a sense after you've tied to the data, to the business strategy. So then, when you get to the unstructured data, how are you going to manage the data, unstructured data? That becomes, relevant. Is it you're going to use, summarization? Are you going to use what methods of data quality are you going to bring to bear on that? It just basically becomes much more focused on the specific aspects you want to tease out. then that's kind of how I think about the data management strategy versus the overarching data strategy, which is kind of tied into the business.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I love the way you put it is that, sort of in the old days or before the strategic role of the chief data and analytics officer, there was a leader of data. And what they did was they sort of went about these sort of mechanical tasks to ensure that invoices and shipments and things of that nature could get to the right customer, be invoiced, et cetera, without duplication. But that the door to the C-suite swung open. Now you're going to have to walk some guy or gal into the C-suite. I call it the rare airspace, right, of the enterprise, and have them be relevant and received at a peer level with people who are making capital investment, strategy decisions for the organization. Which markets are we going into or coming out of, and how does that person become relevant as a strategic thinker? Bringing the translation of a technical capability into a relevant and receivable package that will inform that decision making around strategy is really key. And I know we're focused here on how Carnegie Mellon is actually going about the task of preparing those leaders to be members of the C-suite, respected, regarded, and contributing resources in that sense. Dr. Steier, that brings us to the question of this idea of culture change. And culture change has really even got to start in that rare air space that I spoke about in the C-suite to welcome this person in a relevant way. In the past, CIOs often reported to the CFO or the chief administrative officer, but rarely sat in the C-suite. And so now we've got this person who's kind of regarded in the same way, a technologist with relevance there. So it's an important component for companies to fully embrace the power of data and AI, machine learning, these disciplines that are out there. But based on your experience in supporting different organizations, are CDOs really equipped to be those change agents and to have that seat at the table today? You just look across the landscape of the state of the art or art of the practice in the context of a C-suite contributor. Are CDOs prepared for that?
Another great question. Well, I will say there are at least a few because they're teaching in our Chief Data Officer program, right? And so folks like Dr. Bhandari and other instructors are CDOs and are certainly advocating for change. But in general, the answer to your question is it's probably rarer than it should be. To echo what you and Dr. Bhandari have said, a lot of these CDOs have come up through the ranks of being either data stewards or compliance officers. They focus on data retention, they focus on data privacy, and so on. It's more risk management than it is opportunistically trying to advocate for change. I mean, they're good at advocating for change if there are new regulations and you need to respond to that. But to be more strategic, I think does take a mindset shift. Of course, it takes some background in what data analytics and AI, et cetera, can do for you, for the organization, and a familiarity for where it's been used in other organizations. But they also have to develop a skill for interacting in that rare air, as you put it, and being an advocate for data as an asset, to saying, we need to make an investment here so that down the road, and ideally they could build a business case, but even when there isn't a quantitative business case, you can reap the rewards of that investment. They also have to be able to do what we refer to in the course as culture change hacks. So things that are relatively low effort, but encourage more innovation. Sometimes things are not necessarily driven from the top down. So in a culture that has been driven from top down, how do you encourage bottom up innovation? How do you give incentives, opportunities like hackathons, recognition for people and resources? They need resources to do the experimentation, even if those experiments don't work out. That requires a different mindset than I've seen a lot of CDOs have. I've seen it in chief innovation officers and chief analytics officers, basically because the technologies are not as mature there. But the CDOs have to have that as well. And interacting in that rare air, they also have to make sure they have the backing of at least the COO and ideally the CEO. So they have to be experienced in talking in those terms as well. All of that takes probably a new set of skills that the majority of CDOs in the current role may not have or may need at least to brush up on.
Yeah, I think you're both spot on that. You've both come full circle back to your alma mater, and are now involved with this new Chief Data Officer program at CMU. First of all, what inspired the university to create the program, and to be willing to make the investment in a new department? And why do you both feel it's important to be involved with this new initiative at a personal level?
I'll defer to David. He'll talk about the program, and then I'll give you my personal story on that. So,
okay,
David, you could go first, please.
Yeah, I mean, so Carnegie Mellon has a history of delivering kind of role-based training, which is fairly different than the kind of training they might get in, say, even a master's degree. So they've got training for the chief information officer, for the chief information security officer, for chief digital officers. And as roles expand, like the chief data officer, which are different than all of the ones that I just mentioned, it seems like a natural next step to be able to do it. And personally, after all those years consulting and so on, I think I've got at least a few stories to share with what works and what doesn't work. And I thought it was time to give back to the university. I couldn't have done what I did at those consulting firms without the training that I got at CMU. It's opened up a whole bunch of doors. My specialty is AI and data science. So if I can help future leaders figure out what to do with that, how to cut through the hype and, ask the right questions, it feels like a chance to shape the future. So it's been very exciting for me to see what questions people have. And through a combination of kind of lectures and hands-on exercises, the practicum and so on, to help people practice those skills so that they can ask the right questions as well.
Great, that's really great. Dr. Bhandari.
Yes, so, like I said, there were only 4 of us in 2006. And then the profession took off. There literally are thousands of us now. Of the original 4, I'm the last one standing. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it did allow me to grow with the profession. And by now, I have a complete playbook. I know exactly what I'm going to do day one of that job, on through 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, etc. And I just feel so grateful for having been in that situation that I always wanted to give back to the profession. And I've been doing that in terms of mentoring others. But when I heard about this program that Carnegie Mellon was initiating, and they requested me to come on as a strategic advisor to the program and the advisory board chair, I jumped on it. I jumped on it because I knew that there was the need for such a program, that would help prepare the CDOs of the future. And then for myself, I owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to this university. I count it as one of the formative events that shaped my career, but also me as a person. And so when you put those two together, it's a very powerful combination to come back and work this program. And the final point I make is, I've always thought of Carnegie Mellon as the little big university. They're only like 5,000 or 10,000 students total. I think it's 5 and 5. It used to be 5 and 5, undergrads, grad. Mm-hmm. But, the ideas that they work on have always been really, really big, mm-hmm. Put a rover on Mars, etc., things like that. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it prepares you. And so I just knew that the quality was going to be very high when we did that. folks like David and his staff would make sure that this was a high quality offering. So when I put all that together, it was a no-brainer to come ahead and get this going.
Sounds like you are a big believer in continuous education for the CDO. Is that true?
Oh yeah. I mean, the CDO role, and we've touched on this in various aspects. So it's a great question. It kind of brings it together. There's the aspect of kind of understanding business strategy, competitive strategy, all that stuff. There's the aspect of understanding and keeping pace with technology. And the technology in the space grows very, very fast. It's changing very quickly because think of it, it goes from data, cloud, AI, and now, I mean, I'm thinking about quantum computing. There are all these different major shifts in paradigm that are coming at us on the technology side. And so if you put that together then with the cultural and the change agent aspect of the job, which again is something that's continuously changing. I mean, the world pre-pandemic is very different from the world during the pandemic, and I'm sure it'll be different from the world post-pandemic. And we've got to keep pace with all that stuff. Otherwise, you don't understand your employees, and your customers and your suppliers, and the whole human aspect of the job you've got to keep on top of. So the only way you keep pace with this is to, just humbly learn, right? Be a learner, have that mindset, grow with the knowledge, and also go looking for it along these different dimensions to be a successful CDO.
Yeah, that's a great way to really underscore why we created CDO Magazine, is to help that knowledge expansion continuum accelerate, beyond just the events that are happening out there. And we're excited to see universities stepping to the plate with these certificate programs and degree programs for senior leadership in data and analytics. With that in mind, Dr. Steier, could you give us some details about the program and how it actually prepares the next generation of data leaders? Maybe a peek inside the content of what you guys have determined is critical for the training that you're providing.
Absolutely. So you've got these 13 modules delivered over the course of some number of months, depending on schedules, like five to 6 months or so. And these modules are taught by both CMU faculty like myself and also practitioners like Dr. Bhandari to give a really well-rounded educational experience, not just people who've had experience on the whiteboard, but actually, been accountable for results. And I'll talk about the content of those modules in a moment, but I want to emphasize that our goal is not just to give individual students, the skills that they need, but as in any, I think, advanced degree type program or exec ed program, to create a cohort of students who will be colleagues for life, essentially, and be able to ask each other kinds of questions, so they develop bonds and team projects and so on during the class, and they have access to all the program material from future cohorts, including any updates to the modules we have, and are encouraged through reunions and such to get together. We've kind of honed this over the development of those other role-based trainings, and intend to continue this for CDO. So these sessions are really interactive. When I first delivered the foundations of enterprise data management, the questions were coming in so fast and furious into chat that I almost couldn't keep up with it. And afterwards, I decided, to go back to follow up on the questions, put it in the document, and I realized that document was like 14 pages of, imagine single space stuff. I mean, that's the kind. So the instructors are happy to answer those kind of questions, and we get such good questions because the students are either chief data officers themselves, or they're aspiring CDOs who are happy to engage. So the content. So the 13 modules count like things like I mentioned: foundations of enterprise data management, the role of the CDO, both strategically and at an operational level, what it takes to set up a CDO type organization. The notion of data as an asset, which Dr. Bhandari has talked about, is critical. We talk about data monetization and seeing how you can get economic value out of data up front, along with data maturity. We introduce data analytics. We introduce AI. I give those last two bits. Data engineering. So a little bit about the infrastructure needed to develop data in a kind of modern environment. Introducing things like data lake houses and so on. And we, of course, it's not all roses. There are things like privacy and security that the CDO has to worry about. So that's part of the content as well.
Have you been able to entice members of the C-suite faculty, if you will, team from the corporate America to guest lecture within your program, or do you have former COOs, FOs, MOs, EOs, etc. On faculty? Are they coming to bring their perspective of enlightenment on engagement there?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, the faculty delivering these modules, we just had Craig Brabeck, Chief Data Officer of McDonald's, give us a talk. Olga Lagunova, who was a Chief Data Officer at Pitney Bowes, was there. And then, yes, we do have guest lectures and coaches to the teams. So one of the things I didn't mention is that there is a practicum, so that it's a team project, teams of about 4 or 5 people or so, under the guidance of a coach. And we bring the coaches in from the world, the private sector and from government, to talk to them, not to manage the project. They manage the project themselves, but to really coach them. You could try asking this question and that question and see where that would go. They have a series of deliverables. So, we just talked about analyzing the business strategy of a set of portfolio companies, which are aspects of the economic landscape that the students study, and try to figure out how the data assets, both internal enterprise data assets and potentially external data assets, could align with the business strategy. So really focused on that part that we've been talking all along through this interview. And there will be other deliverables that will eventually essentially create a roadmap, a strategic enterprise data management utilization roadmap, to kind of put them in the role of Chief Data Officer, but to do it in a safe academic setting, right? We're not going to fire them, but they are going to be asked to give talks and to give executive presentations. And at the end, we are actually going to bring in people from industry and government to be on a panel that hears the executive presentations, and they'll get detailed feedback from that as well.
That's great to know. Well, we're about to run out of time here, so I want to kind of bring us to a wrap. I'm going to throw you a little curveball, both of you, and I know that you're going to handle my curveball. So, the decade of the 1920s is referred to widely as the Roaring '20s, and it was a period when Industrial Revolution hit its stride, and in America and the world really changed, permanently the way people live and work, and how products are produced, and consumerism evolved out of that. But it was preceded, if you both recall, by the pandemic of 1918, 1919. And so here we are 100 years later. The pandemic of 2020 here has hit us, this COVID-19 pandemic. And, digital transformation has been forced to hit its stride and to run hard, which is really driven by data, powered by data and in analytics and insight. So as we think about the future, the rest of this decade out to 2030 and beyond, and you think about the role and the importance of the Chief Data Officer in the inflection point that we're going through and experiencing, and how the world will be different before or after the pandemic than it has been before. What are your projections or your prognostications about the future? And let's start with Dr. Bhandari, and we'll wrap up with you, Dr. Steier. what's in your crystal ball as we look out to, and hopefully 2029 doesn't bring on what 1929 brought on. But let's look into the future and make a prognostication.
Yeah.
If you would.
I think, and you're seeing the acceleration with the digital transformation post-pandemic, because companies really have realized that they don't have a choice, but they do have to be able to transact business and operate digitally. So that's really accelerated the digital transformation. I think that's going to continue. That's going to come to a full. But I'll also, I'll give you one or two counterintuitive ones that I believe are going to take hold. I think there's going to be a lot of focus, a lot of energy, and also innovation in just getting to more accurate data, just because the level of disinformation and the kinds of things that are going on today, people have recognized that to be a problem. So I think that will start getting solved, and data is at the heart of that.
Yes.
In terms of the accuracy that matters. I think the ability for people to access relevant data in real time, I think, is going to be also one of those problems that have come out very squarely in the course of this pandemic. I think those will get resolved over the next 10 years or so as people start focusing on it, innovators and so forth. And I think the last one is around data sovereignty. I think people are also beginning to understand that data is strategic. It's strategic asset for enterprises, strategic asset for individuals. And so I think there's going to be, that will play out as to how data sovereignty gets established, who controls it, who owns it, all that stuff I think is going to get ironed out over the next 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm. And shifting over to you, Dr. Steier, for the last word.
Okay. As I mentioned, AI to me, there's no better time to be working in the field of artificial intelligence. And I think CDOs will really be in a good position to take advantage of that because of this massive opportunity in a lot of the things that Dr. Bhandari has just mentioned, which involve data integration. So data integration, when you've got internal and external sources, and we talked about the various data quality issues, there's not too many automated solutions to that right now. And it's just too huge an area to see us not address those things. It's not just filling in a few missing values. Like, you need to know when to bring in a new data source, how the pieces fit together. And that requires a level currently of human intelligence and robust intelligence that AI really hasn't tackled too much. And I think it's a huge opportunity. It's not even in the research world have we seen systems that are robust enough to reason about, here's something I don't know. I need more information about X. Let me go out and try to find a data source to do that. Mm-hmm. And so we have, to some extent, for highly structured relational data. But when we talk about structured, unstructured data, like we were talking about before, external data sources, the field is still pretty much wide open for a suitably ambitious CDO. And so I pose that not as a prediction, but as a challenge. I'd like to see more CDOs enter the C-suite with the vision in mind that they're going to do something to address that data integration problem with more intelligent systems.
Well, thank you both for being a part of the inspiration and support of Carnegie Mellon University's commitment to prepare the chief data officers of the future. Without you and folks like you, that learning and that knowledge transfer and expansion wouldn't be happening. We've really had a great conversation. Thanks for the time today. I feel honored to be talking to two members of two very historic and important organizations within the history of the United States and our contributions to the world platform. I know the Watson platform is inspired by Thomas Watson, the sort of credited founding CEO of IBM, one of my favorite personalities in history. And Carnegie Mellon University's namesakes are very important in the world. So thank you both for making time today to spend with me here at CDO Magazine. And I hope to see you again I look forward to any article contributions or additional interviews. I think, Dr. Bhandari, you've been interviewed by our publication. There's an interview with you out that's will be out on the site. So, Dr. Steier, probably the same thing should happen if it hasn't. We'll look forward to that. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.